Robert, welcome. And yeah, it's great to have you on the show. I'm so glad we managed to get this set up. I know you are incredibly busy as a very successful businessman in the banking industry in South Africa, but you have a long and distinguished career in academics, having studied at Oxford and many other fine institutions. So I'm keen to get into all the lessons that you can share with our listeners today, many of whom are studying themselves part-time or considering getting into studying. But before we get into all of those tips and tricks and techniques that I want to get out of your many years of experience and incredible wisdom that you have to share with us, maybe just give us a little bit of background in terms of your studies that you've done over the years and your journey. And maybe, as we call this student success podcast, your definition of success as a student in all of those years of studying and academic endeavors. Rob.
All right. Well, I certainly have not taken a very traditional academic journey through my life. I think it really started off with the fact that I was 16 in matric and had to make career choices and choices on what to study. And I think at that time, one certainly has very little experience of yourself and what you wanted to do and what you should be doing and what was available out there. So I looked at the Wits handbook and I realized that I probably was more interested in the sciences. And there were two subjects there that I didn't know anything about. One was microbiology and one was biochemistry. So I thought, all right, well, I'd major in both of those. So, you know, that's a 16-year-old making a very bad academic decision. I mean, I found it interesting enough that I actually completed the degree. But then when I got to the end of that, I was now 20 and I didn't want to go to the army. So I decided, well, I would stay on and do honors in microbiology. I didn't actually do anything until the 11th of September of that year, other than play bridge. And why I know the 11th of September, it was the day my professor was coming back from sabbatical and the day it snowed in Johannesburg. And I spent the day in the library trying to find out what mononuclear phagocytes were, because theoretically I'd been spending 9 months studying them. I continued to realize that I probably didn't want to stay in the science field, so I then went into, started a BCom part-time. And a friend of mine said, if I'm going to do a BCom, I must do it properly and I must major in accounting. So I then started to study a Bachelor of Accountancy to qualify as a chartered accountant. That actually was probably when I realized that I actually was pivoting, and then realized I had to go start articles. So I gave up my job as a biohydrometallurgist, where I was developing a way to mine gold using bacteria, and went and started articles. The articles were fun. I really enjoyed the people side of articles more than the accounting side, which I think is a bit surprising because I don't think people go into a chartered accountant knowing that it was about people and not only about numbers. Anyway, after completing articles, I was faced with a career decision to stay in the auditing profession or not, and decided to take a sabbatical. And when I returned, some of my ex-clients offered me jobs. One was in a stockbroking business, and the other one actually in advertising. I thought that the one in advertising sounded a bit more interesting. So I then went into advertising for a couple of years before I was approached to join Anglo American in the risk and audit services. At that time, they asked me to do they were running an in-house MBA through University School of Business Leadership, and I was selected to go on that, and was then exposed to sort of business and business strategy. I then moved into banking from that. FirstRand had been formed, and Anglo American was one of the major shareholders of it at the time, so I moved into it, and then started to study. Well, I actually realized that I needed to understand the industry of the financial planning, so I did a postgraduate diploma in financial management, financial planning, and qualified as a CFP. One of the in-house training courses that we did at FirstRand at the time was around strategy. And this is actually when I was in my 40s that I started to realize that I was now finding something that really interested me. So strategy and innovation became an area of interest. And I was doing a lot of the work practically in FirstRand. When I decided that actually I wanted to do something that mixed the two together, the two things being a lifelong desire to study at one of the top international universities, and also to get more technical understanding on strategy and innovation. And I went through a rather protracted process to apply to Oxford, and was accepted, and did a master's level degree in strategy and innovation there. I think to come back to your second question that you started off asking is, I think it was, what did I get out of this, or what was the learnings from this? I think that my varied academic career in so many different disciplines has created me an ability to think and pull on different inputs when solving problems. I think that as a consequence of it, I'm not just like an accountant who would only look at the numbers. I would approach the problem in very much a scientific way because of my scientific training. At the same time, with the strategy, I would apply that scientific thinking to strategy, but at the same time, make sure that the financial side was certainly included. I think also understanding different aspects of different industries really helps you have a much more nuanced understanding. So I did my honors on a virus very closely related to HIV virus, in fact, in the year that the virus was discovered. So, you know, if I look at the economic impact of AIDS on the South African economy, I had a scientific understanding of what we were dealing with, rather than just economic understanding or psychological understanding. So I've been asked this question because people have found my academic career particularly strange, and have asked me this question a number of times: would I do it differently? I think if I had started with strategy and innovation, I'd be a far less rounded person. And I think I would be a weaker strategist because I don't have as much depth of experience to pull on, because every problem that you look at is very different. And I think the more varied you are, and the more different disciplines that you've got more to pull on in order to solve problems.
Rob, thank you very much. And I was just counting your degrees as you were going through your experience. I think I got to 4 or 5, counting the master's level strategy qualification at Oxford. But you probably lost count along the way. But as you said,
it's 6, and I did have 3 professional qualifications where I registered professional bodies, but now I've only got 2.
Well, Rob, and just, I mean, your final sort of thoughts around how that experience and training gives you just that sort of very rounded approach to solving problems. And I mean, you were very close to my own PhD, and something that I learned as well, as I tried to bring some of the social sciences thinking into a very scientific domain like software engineering, and really starting to unlock those insights as you apply learnings and methodologies from one track into another. And I think, that's where the future is. It's at the boundaries. It's at the intersections between these different fields. And I think just so insightful for people listening that, as you say, it was only until you're in your 40s, after getting a couple of degrees in some interesting topics, but perhaps wasn't where you wanted to spend the rest of your life, that you ultimately then managed to zero in on what was going to make the most difference for you, but that you did in a way that drew on all of that experience that you had got up until that point. So Rob, I guess, what I'm looking for and what would be so useful for our listeners is just any advice. And I think, people listening are going to be looking for answers, looking for quick fixes, looking for something practical that they can do tomorrow or the next week, or they're grappling, and people are struggling, and they're still in those phase of, like, you've been through it now. You've been through that decision making process. You've gone down the cul-de-sacs. You've come back. You've done the pivots, etc. What would be some advice, at a practical level that people can implement to make their way through their own academic journeys?
Well, I recently was a speaker at a university's conference on the future of the fourth industrial revolution and the impact on education. And the point that I was making up there is that the world is changing, and we cannot be as narrow in our discipline. So, for example, if you were studied pharmacy, you really have got to understand what the fourth industrial revolution, some understanding of data and AI, etc., because the nature of your pharmacy, it could be pharmacy or architecture or any degree, is going to be driven by this. And I made a plea to the university that what they need to do is make sure that the structure of the degrees are open enough for people to bring in courses, modules, or even introductory modules into these disciplines of AI and big data, etc., in order to make the degrees more round. Now, I think if you're finding yourself at a university that hasn't adopted that approach, and I can tell you that in my BSc, I was forced to do an honours degree. I did it in, well, I actually started off in art history, and then I did it in political science and institutions before doing economics in it. And similarly in my, you had to do communications, which was really an arts degree. I think that you can actually enhance your degrees by looking at those non-traditional subjects and add them on as extra courses, and or in this day really look at modular courses that you can add on through things like Coursera or any of those type of MOOCs that offer these type of courses, because I think that the fringe qualifications that you can get will actually enhance your core qualifications and make you far better at what you're doing. If you're an accountant and you've done something like that, it's Steve Jobs, but doing calligraphy, which actually helped him design a better looking mobile phone. So unless you are an absolute specialist accountant who's only interested in IFRS, I think you need to broaden your knowledge and experience by taking on these different little courses and or subjects onto your degree to make it a much more rounded. And I actually think it actually makes it more interesting to interview somebody where you can actually ask them, why in your accounts degree did you add on stats? Or why did you add on English literature? Or why did you add on French? I actually think that those things will become differentiators, because if you've got an interest in French and you're an accountant, French firms would be much more interested in looking at your CV than one who doesn't have it.
Rob, I love that. So, just your point around these sort of non-traditional subjects could become the differentiators. I think that is just such an awesome insight, where people are maybe getting stuck, in the sort of traditional track that they feel they're expected to complete and work through, but perhaps lose hope in how they'll, make a difference, or how that will help them, make a contribution in perhaps what is a well-worn path that they're just following for the sake of it. And as you say, with the impact of the fourth industrial revolution on so many industries, and you mentioned pharmacy and a couple of others, we almost have to anticipate that by starting in our own lives and disrupting our traditional view of what an education is and what a degree is and what are the steps we take to get that qualification behind our name, which is ultimately not necessarily what it's all going to be about in the future.
Well, in the UK, people can choose, if you want to become a chartered accountant, you do any undergrad degree. It could be in history, it could be in classics, etc. And then only when you start to do articles do you actually start to train up on that. I think it creates a very different type of accountant to the typical South African ones, which are very much around a very narrow discipline. I really think that if you are too narrow, you're not going to see the opportunities. I think every degree should have been exposed to some type of climate change, data, new technology, a little bit of coding, because I think that will make you more rounded. But I certainly would add on things like art history. A friend of ours who was an art teacher at a primary school said, why are you so fixated on, in fact, she was a lawyer teaching art. And she said, one day these kids are going to be students. And if they're doctors, and if they're a plastic surgeon and they know how to draw, they're going to be much more better at doing beautiful plastic surgery rather than rough plastic surgery. And I think it also becomes with accountants who've got some sensitivity when they put together the presentations, that they can make them look prettier than just aerial ones. So I do think these extra disciplines actually help mold you into a much more holistic individual who's got ability to stand out.
And Rob, I mean, the two examples that you gave there of the doctor and the accountant, and it talks to how we sort of produce and consume information, has changed so much. And the emphasis is placed, I think, so much more now on the packaging and the sort of aesthetics and the person receiving the communication. And, with the sort of goldfish bowl rule that we have of everybody being so busy and disrupted in their own lives, to get your message across, you can't rely on the fact that it is important accounting, or it is just because the doctor said so. There's that sort of artistic element to everything that we communicate today.
I refer to the fact that I was forced to do a communication studies course in my BAc. And in fact, I elected to do the verbal presentation one, which actually was my weaker of my verbal versus written. And it was probably one of the most valuable courses that I did. Because when I was a CFO, you've got to present budgets. You've got to get people over the line with your budgets. And, if you've actually had that type of training, you're much more effective in your presentation skills and the way you construct your messages. And funny enough, those basic things that I learned in that one year course that I was forced to do have actually really been very valuable as I've matured into a much more rounded general management manager than a narrow chartered accountant.
And Rob, I've had the pleasure of seeing you present to a room full of people, and you can be extremely persuasive, and you've put all of those skills to very good use, certainly in the corporate roles that I've seen you operate. Rob, let's talk about Oxford. I mean, so you said that it was a lifelong goal of yours. Why was that? And I think, people do respect it as an incredible institution. My grandfather, as I mentioned to you previously, he read history at Balliol College in Oxford. And I know that, you had a wonderful time when you were over there. So just talk us through the journey of your expectations and whether it met up and what you got out of it, etc.
All right. I think that wanting to study at an international university was part of trying to benchmark myself on an international stage, being one, and two, the access to incredible lecturers world-class lecturers. I think those were the two things that I wanted the experience for. My story of this is actually more interesting. A Harvard professor did a business case study on a product that I launched at FNB and taught it to the MBA class at Oxford. And I remained in contact with this professor over the years. He was then appointed the Dean of the Business School at Oxford. And I visited him once when I was in the UK, and he mentioned to me that he really thought that this course was the one that would actually be very good for me. So a couple of years later, I applied for the course, and then I got another reply from them, and then they asked me to send through a CV and a few other bits of information, which I sent through, thinking that was the end of the interview. And then I got the call from somebody who said that they've considered me and they think I might have a chance of getting in, so I'd be encouraged to apply. Well, by this stage, I really thought I'd applied twice. And that's when the detailed application started. They wanted every mark that I got for every subject of every degree at every university that I was at. I had essays I had to write, and I had to get references and write a letter of motivation of why I would want to do this course. I think that I was not the only one who was astounded to find that we had got through. I remember my first visit there, 4 of us went out for dinner, and every single one of us were absolutely astounded that we had actually managed to make it, because it was a real challenge to get in. The class was absolutely amazing. I mean, we had one person with 3 PhDs who was voted the runner-up for the finest foreign student in the UK for a PhD. We had deans of vice chancellors of universities in the class. We had the person who had codified cost accounting for the world. We had the ex-chief of police for California. So, I mean, they were absolutely amazing people. And I think that is probably one of the most amazing things, that they said that a third of your learning would come out of your class. I didn't understand it. But during the case studies, when they spoke about the golf spill, they said, well, this is how they handled it. And one of my classmates put their hand up and said, no, I was on that team. The emails, the website fell down. We used emails in order to get around, and we'll do that. So when we spoke about the Google Glass, the guy from California said, no. Sergey Brin said, no, he didn't do it that way, he did it this way. So the truth of the matter, the quality of the people that were in the class were an incredible part of the learning. The academic style at Oxford is very different from what I'd ever been experienced in South Africa. They say there is no wrong or right. There are only good or bad answers. There are no model answers for any of the exams. It is very subjective, and really actually just challenges you on thinking. So that was a very interesting insight. I also really enjoyed the research thesis part of it. It was forcing you to find some really interesting new stuff in order to explore and really do some dedicated research into it. And although time was very short and was very challenging in it, I really think that I ended up actually finding something new that I feel other people can use, and helped add a bit more knowledge to the world.
Fantastic, Rob. And at the end of the day, although the quality is incredible and it attracts an amazing standard of students, I guess it is just another university. I mean, yes, it is obviously one of the top ones around the world, but at the end of the day, it's an organization that attracts students to take them through a journey with a learning outcome, and they have a style of doing it and a long and proud tradition and a history. And for students to select and look at universities, they've got to take all these things into into consideration, I guess, and ultimately do what's right for them and for their career and for their situation.
So not all universities are right for everybody. The Syed Business School specifically looks for people who want to make a difference to the world, who have some type of soul they want it. They specifically focus on Africa. They have the highest intake from Africa, which is, I think, about between 10 and 14%. And in a recent thing I've said, they also focus on women. They've got, I think they had 39% of women in their class. So they select very much around that, and that's why those motivations that you write, they actually look at it. I recently did a 5 references for an individual ex-member of staff who was applying at Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Yale, and a fifth one. I had to write 5 different application references for him. He didn't get into his first choice, which was the university that his girlfriend was going to. But he said to me at the end, he said, I ended up in the right one because the one that he was going to was much more around his values. And they obviously had selected him through my reference and his motivation, which aligned the values with the organization. So Oxford worked with me because I knew what Peter Tufano's focus on Africa, focus on inclusive banking, because that's what we had done the work with prior. But at the same time, it really worked for me, the fact that you write exams in subfusc, which are black suits, white ties and gowns with hats on. You actually go and write that. At the tradition, you wear a white carnation for your first exam, pink carnations for all your other exams, and a red carnation for your last exam. And when you graduate, you go and jump in the Cherwell River. So, I think that those traditions, the formal dinners that they have in the halls, the fact you belong to a college and not a university. There are 38 colleges, and that actually is your university. The Oxford University is just a governing body over the top. The fact that they have the most strange academic, in undergrad, you don't attend lectures. You have one-on-one coaching with your lecturers. It's very inefficient, but it ends up with a completely customized academic program for each individual. Because what happens in the first week, you meet with your lecturer, he discusses a topic, you go and write an essay on it, he marks it, then you come back and he discusses it with you. And then after that, he'll say, well, listen, obviously didn't understand this, or you found this exciting, so now next week you'll go and look at and do another essay on that topic. It is for this reason that Oxford is continuously rated the best university in the world, undergraduate university. It is an incredibly inefficient way of teaching, but an incredibly effective way of customizing a university degree for an individual. So, if you're after money, Harvard is the way to go because, those degrees get you the biggest salary jumps. I do think that a degree from the Oxford Business School really rounds you to be much more of a person who will help change the world.
Rob, thank you. That's incredible insight and so useful for everyone just to get that, to look behind the curtain of this sort of, as you say, the top university in the world. And that really is interesting. Rob, maybe just then some of the sort of practical aspects of studying, as you said, and there are traditions attached to it. But at the end of the day, I mean, there are some common skills that I think students really need to focus on and make sure that they spend enough time on to be successful. Things like writing, and being able to develop a good thesis statement and go through a proposal to have a study approved. You were very helpful, in my final stages of writing up my dissertation. in the section where I needed to present back my findings in a way that was useful for the industry, etc. So maybe, just your thoughts and advice on some of those core student skills that are going to be necessary wherever you study, and will be slightly different in different faculties and disciplines, etc. But what have you learned over the years?
Yeah. So the first thing is I think that people have got very different learning style. And it takes you time to understand your learning style. So I learn by listening and drawing. I always attend lectures because I seem to absorb knowledge easiest through my ears rather than reading. Other people, like a friend's son, I don't think he went to a single lecture. He graduated top of his class and was on F&B graduate program, and just completed an MBA at the London Business School. But he doesn't go to lectures. He reads. That's how he takes information in. Other people learn by writing notes. It's a way that they get the knowledge in. So I think that understanding your style is quite, your learning style is quite important. Some people need to discuss it, where you teach it to people, etc. That's the way of doing it. So I think there are different styles of learning. I think you need to know yours. The second is that there's so many opportunities available in universities. Like, lectures are really available, much more available than students think. So if you don't understand, you should be speaking to them. I think that classmates you can deal with. There's a lot more reading. If you're a reader and you want more information, you can take it in like that. So I think the first thing is understanding your learning style, and then realizing that you've got all these resources that all universities have. They don't always look obvious, and you need to make sure you're accessing them. You had another question, but
Rob, so absolutely. And I mean, the learning process. So I learned by writing. And maybe, that was sort of, part of the question around writing, and sort of, and that sort of being a critical measure in a higher education qualification, and something that, students do need to get good at. And I've, put courses and workshops together, and certainly in an environment where English is a second language, for example, writing as a discipline and good academic research, and being able to go through that in a qualification. And as I said, something that, you helped me with in my own dissertation, just to make sure that I was writing for my reader, which was somebody in industry that wanted to learn something from the theory and the results that I had produced. What are your sort of words of wisdom around that writing and researching process?
So I'm a bit of a writer, but I'm a summarizer. I like to distill all these facts until I can actually get it onto one page. So I tend to write my own notes, and then I take those into 10 pages of notes, and then I try to get it down to one page, and that one page tends to have frameworks, right? And these frameworks are the type of frameworks that you would use in writing, in analyzing, etc. And they can be used in business writing. They can be used in analyzing a problem, or they can be used in communication. So I think that if you do have frameworks, and a whole variety of frameworks that I collected over my years, I can actually then take those frameworks and apply them to a problem, which means that your communication and the way your output is a lot more structured and accessible to the reader, or the person listening to the conversation. It's a bit like the simple thing about a presentation. Tell the people what you're going to do, come with the story, and then summarize at the end. But that's just one. I think there are a lot more different ones, which are sometimes more useful for complicated problems.
So, Rob, I guess, we're either learning about frameworks that have been developed to help us understand the world, and then applying those, or hopefully we're developing new knowledge and new frameworks based on our studies and the results and the analysis that we've done to help other people understand the world. And I followed grounded theory, which is an inductive research method that, at the end of it, you actually produce a theory which is grounded in the data, and in a very structured, systematic way. That was how I presented my results and my data. And I guess, for students listening and people that have the opportunity and have chosen the right university for them to go and do research, as you said right at the beginning, the world is changing and we need people to make a contribution. We need people to extend our knowledge of the world for humanity. And we all have that important role to play. And even though we may wish we could change the world far quicker in our own degrees, we're often only able to do it one little step at a time. And that's often the danger, is we bite off too much and then we fail or we drop out. Rather have a narrow, well-defined scope and produce a good contribution within that than a very wide scope, and then we actually sort of fall off the bus during the process. So just, your thoughts about striking that right balance and in your own experience of doing research?
I think it depends on the problem. I have often given advice to people writing and doing their research thesis to start off as narrow as possible, because even if you start as narrow as possible, the nature of the problem will actually force you to become a little bit more broad in it. If you start broad, it's like boiling the ocean, right? But I don't think it always applies to every research problem. So a colleague of ours that has just completed a master's at the CAS Business School, he chose a problem that had not been researched at all before. And in fact, he's graduated with distinction on his thesis. And it was an incredibly general way of looking at this problem, only because it really had to really start to actually figure out whether this nebulous opportunity actually had any justification. And all he did is really look at it from a very nebulous way with absolutely no tight starting point, and ended up with basically saying, I can't tell you if it works, but I can tell you that I think it's worth researching. And it was so completely different that I gave him a distinction for it. And really, his problem that he was looking at said, could artificial intelligence and that type of stuff be used in policy determination by governments?
Wow. Rob, incredible stuff. You've given us such an interesting, perspective on a very sort of advanced world of research and development of knowledge and frameworks, and so grateful for that. Rob, just, last couple of thoughts. It's been a tough year. We've been through 2020. This interview will probably air in 2021, but, we're going to feel the effects of, the lockdowns and the depressed economy, not only in our home country, South Africa, but, around the world. And, students, like anybody else, are going to have lots of uncertainty and ultimately just want to become self-sufficient, provide for themselves and their family, etc. I guess the world of education is also going to be disrupted, and none of us are going to be able to see the future perfectly. But in that context of a depressed economy, lots of uncertainty, ongoing disruption, how do people make sense of it and use their education and their qualifications or the opportunities they have to study to find their path, to find their way through the world and all the difficulties that are being thrown at them? You've had a distinguished career. You've done exceptionally well. You've got a list of degrees behind you. Many people will say you've arrived. I know you will continue working hard and making a contribution, but somebody 20, 25, 30 years still at the early stages, living in an incredibly fascinating time in the world, but equally very challenging. In the context of an academic career, what would be your last sort of thoughts of advice and wisdom for them?
Right. Well, if you go back 50 to 100 years, the world was very slow and very static. If you decided to become a lawyer, the law was very limited. very static, and you learned it and then you applied it. The world has sped up from the 50s and exponentially. So, all of a sudden our lawyers need to know things like electronic signing and patents over digital patents and things like that were not physical. So the world is becoming, it was changed at an exponential rate. So I don't think you can sit back and think that your starting point is actually going to continue as it is for forever. So if your starting point is an accountant, you've got to actually realize that the world's changing so fast, you've got to keep up with the pace. So if you look at, you can't actually just look at, you've got to actually understand the drivers in the world and make sure that you're responding to making sure you are in the stream. So if you're an accountant and you're not getting on this data journey, you are going to become irrelevant and you're going to miss the stream. If you're an accountant and you're not worrying about global climate change, you're not going to produce integrated reports that are going to go to crack it. If you are an accountant and you're not understanding that millennials have very different ways of working, you're not going to be able to get them full time, and the gig economy is coming. You've got to actually start to understand that, and you've got to actually understand how to work with them and the technologies that enable people to work in the gig economy. I don't know what the next changes are going to be, but with COVID, I think we've had a much bigger change in this trajectory. And all of a sudden, people start to say, I don't even have to be in Johannesburg for our work. So, I mean, that's just one of the changes. And you've got to get your mind around, otherwise you're going to lose that talent. I think that there's going to be an incredible change to the psyche of people. I think that human connectedness is going to change. With people not going to the office, you've got to actually figure out other ways of connecting. And, connecting 15 years ago, who would have thought you'd send a thing called an emoji to show that you actually like something? Now everybody uses emojis. I don't know what's going to come out of it, but we've got to realize we're going to have to adapt very, very quickly to whatever's going to be an emoji way to send a communication to a remote worker is probably not in your country, is only working for you for 3.5 hours a week, because the rest of the time they actually want to be a stay-at-home mother, because they actually are homeschooling their kids because they actually have given up on the traditional way of schooling. So the world is going to be changed. You've got to be open to these winds of change and making sure that you are surfing them as those waves come.
Rob, thank you. And I guess, use your studies as a vehicle, but, open the windows and make sure that you participate and contribute and be integrated in everything else that is going on. And I think, the point that you made just now around that evolution means that we can't think in those buckets or silos anymore. Like we said at the very beginning, it's in the margins, it's in the interdisciplinary work that we do where the magic is going to come. And look out for that. Be proactive. Think outside of your box. Look for those opportunities. Make things happen for yourself. Rob, this time that we've had together has been full of wonderful insights, and I've been very grateful to have access to you and your wisdom, and everyone that's been listening. I'm sure it's given us all pause for thought and consideration to just reassess where we are and how we're going to participate in this fast-changing world. So, Rob, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
It's been fun. Thank you for inviting me.